Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. This is Elena Christopher with HFS Research. I'm a Senior Vice President here, leading our research on AAA trifecta technologies and integrated automation. Really pleased to have you join us today. We've got a great webinar set up. We're going to be looking at what we call AAA all the way. And we'll tell you more about what our AAA trifecta is. But what this webinar is all about is we're obviously continue to be somewhat knee-deep in a global pandemic. And one of the things that we're observing through our research at HFS is that this pandemic is really bringing many priorities to a very clear head for enterprises. And among them, we see automation really coming into some strong fruition, coming really into its own. It's just a great, certainly priority and a great attribute for many enterprises to help really continue to further their digital strategies. So what we wanted to do today was really take a look at what evolving automation programs are looking like, how they've been impacted by the pandemic, and above all, what they look like on a go-forward basis. And part of our strong thesis has always been that to have a strong and successful automation program, it really requires elements of the AAA trifecta to help you achieve maximum success. So I've got a great set of folks with me today that are going to really help me dive in and provide some great contextual details around, is this true, is this not true, and the in-betweens of how to really do this and how to get it right. So let me go ahead and introduce the panel. We'll go first to Clemmy Malley. Why don't you say hello? And as my CEO, Phil, would say, name, rank, and serial number, please.
Hi, everybody. My name is Clemmy Malley. Thank you, Elena. I am the Enterprise Automation COE Lead at Nextera Energy.
Super. Great to have you with us today, Clemmy. Next, we'll go over to Ryad Ali. Ryad, why don't you, same situation, name, rank, serial number, please.
Yeah, hi everyone, it's Ryad Ali. I'm from a company called Insight, where I am the head of digital innovation that includes automation.
Super, great to have you with us, Ryad. And last but not least, Marisa Kokenauer.
Thanks, Elena. Hi everyone, my name is Marisa Kokenauer. I'm the head of automation advisory at Cognizant.
Superb, and also great to have you with us today, Marisa. Well, why don't we're gonna get started here, but before we do that, some quick housekeeping. So for all of those that have joined us, again, thank you for choosing to spend an hour with us today. The format that we'll use for this webinar is, I always call it, it's a conversation with slides. And so the folks, myself and the three great panelists I've just introduced you to, will be the ones leading the discussion today. And so we can get through our content. We will not have any of our participants on audio, but we do want to hear from you. So please take a moment and find these icons within your Zoom window, and you'll see one that's called Q&A. If you click on that Q&A icon, it'll bring up a box like you see on the right of our screen here, and it'll just allow you to ask questions. So we'll monitor that on an ongoing basis. We'll try and get some of these questions answered as we go. But what we'll endeavor to do throughout is to leave 5 to 7 minutes or so at the end to try and address any of the questions that we have not. So with that then, let's dive into some of our content. What we're going to cover today. I mentioned a bit of this in the introduction, but how we'll go through sort of the mechanics of how we'll go through this topic of the post-pandemic strategies for automation success and how they align to the AAA trifecta. I'll take a few minutes and provide some market context and update using some of the latest and greatest research and thinking from HFS. And then we'll dive into what I'm sure will be a very lively discussion, as I say here, say it with great affection, some tales from the trenches, really bringing some context from all the great work that Clemmy and Ryad and Marisa are doing in their respective shops, and in your case, Marisa, with a variety of different clients. But some of the things that we'll really strive to dive into, because we believe in truth in advertising. But what we really wanted to do at this session was dive into what is the AAA trifecta all about and why does it even matter? And one of the things that we tend to purport that happens when you bring different permutations of technology together is that it can deliver greater benefits. Dare we say exponential benefits? Is this real? So we'll talk a bit about that. Then we'll move on to what's the role of ecosystem in helping enterprises actually get this done. So we'll dive into that. And then last but not least, we'll of course close strong on looking towards the future and really share some thoughts with you about how to be successful in accelerating automation post-pandemic. So that is the game plan. I'll take just one brief moment to talk about HFS. We are your erstwhile hosts today for this webinar. On the off chance that you don't know us, I'll just give you a couple of quick facts. The way that we describe our company is that our mission is all about helping firms really optimize their impact, the impact on their future business operations, really to operate as effectively as possible. We're never the firm that's really going to go very, very deep into features and functions of technology. Really what we're always looking at is what is the business impact from any lever that you as an organization might utilize to derive a particular outcome. What are they good at? What's their merit? And what can you as an enterprise take away from it? And the types of levers that we look at are lots of different types of emerging technologies, like our conversation today, as well as different mechanisms like use of different types of service providers to help enterprises get a leg up and get some of that expertise that they really need to leverage to achieve those objectives. This is actually 2020. What a heck of a year it's been so far, but 2020 is our 10-year anniversary. We were founded in 2010. Some of you may know my CEO, Phil Firsch. He actually started a blog back in 2017 focused on the outsourcing marketplace, and he called it Horses for Sources. You guys can sort of triangulate on that name and the fact that as our company, we are HFS. But we've been a digital business since inception, and I think one of the things that's happened because of that, as well as our really from inception as well, our strong belief in the power of social media is that, and we also, by the way, we continue to, we have a very strong syndicated subscription-based research program, but we also do believe that in order to have lots of interesting discussions, you have to contribute to the dialogue. And so to that extent, we still provide a lot of our research on a complimentary basis, or perhaps more accurately for the low, low price of your email ID. But that's really helped us have a gigantic readership base. So some of these stats up on the screen will show you. It really helps us for a session like this, really enables us to have great conversations with folks across all sorts of industries, literally around the globe. So thank you for your support and interest in HFS. Let's dive into some of this content. So as you guys have probably more than likely noticed, we are in the midst of a global pandemic. We, in trying to be thoughtful about what this means and what this actually looks like, we coined this phrase of we're all in the midst of a paradigm shock. We're perhaps all familiar with this concept of a paradigm shift, but just the impact that this pandemic is having on each of us as individuals, on companies, on enterprises, on the economy. There's so many impacts. So we thought it was very appropriate to refer to this as the paradigm shock. I won't go into too much detail about these phases, but we thought it was very important to identify, and this is part of what research houses do, is really to put a name and a framework to what we're going through, what we're all experiencing. And so back in March, obviously World Health Organization declared this a global pandemic. I think it was March 10th to be specific. And so really that launched us into, and to be fair, I mean, many parts of Asia Pacific were well ahead of us, but that the World Health Organization with that date, that sort of is a very firm stake in the ground. But it really led us all into a lot of crisis mode, which is figuring out how to keep employees safe, mass moves to work from home, and just a lot of the reaction. That eventually gave way into the phase 2, the stabilization, from all of the enterprises and players in the market that we've continued to talk with. It was all about how can we get back to some semblance of business as usual so that you could, knowing that your employees were protected and safe, how you could keep your supply chains moving, how you could satisfy your service level objectives to your customers. how you could just fundamentally run your businesses. And there was a lot of figuring out what you can do and what you can't do. So we've been through, I feel like most enterprises have really been through that stabilization. And we've come out to we club together phase 3 and phase 4 because they do tend to bleed into one another. And this is really where we are now. When you think of maps, you always have those nice indicators of where are we? Well, where we are now is somewhere in the midst of the realization phase and the unleashing people phase. Realization is all about every enterprise out there is taking stock of where we are. You now have a good baseline for what works and what doesn't work. One of our observations has been that one of the things that the pandemic has really done is put a very fine point on what works in your organization. Some of these processes that perhaps you've been aware of were not terribly efficient, maybe too manual, maybe too physical in nature, maybe too paper-based in nature, but being forced to work in this virtual format that we all have done, it's made very clear where a lot of the work needs to be done for many organizations. So now a lot of the prioritizations are being set about where you want to place your bets, where you want to make your investments. And so that's some of what we're experiencing in this realization phase. The HFS stake in the ground about where this goes from here is we believe that what most enterprises will do is really rally around a concept of unleashing people. And this is not just your employees. It's really leveraging a range of digital technologies and truly that we think of it as truly the digital unleashed for the first time, perhaps, because another casual observation that we've had is that we think digital perhaps has context very broadly for perhaps the first time ever. And all we really mean by that is that just that notion of physical versus digital, or I could also say it as physical versus virtual. It's so well understood by pretty much the entire world at this point. There's suddenly just a greater context for what it means to be digital. And so within that context of, at the very least, at its very essence of being not physical, we have this opportunity to unleash people. So yes, it's definitely unleashing your employees, but it's unleashing ways to better engage with your customers. It's unleashing ways to better engage with your partners. So that's where we think the potential market is going. And it's really, we believe it's this creation now of within those priorities, we're calling this the have-to-have economy. We did back to that wonderful, gigantic readership base that we have at HFS. We reached out to our readership base with a survey back in April to try and really take the temperature of how the chips were going to fall in terms of more specifically, what are the priorities? And so we had asked 631 enterprises how COVID-19 was going to impact their spending for these various categories you see on the left-hand side of this slide. And so not surprisingly, what rose to the top was cybersecurity. There's obviously a substantial, it's one thing to suddenly send everyone home and be working remotely. It's entirely another thing to do that with the greatest of efficacy to privacy, security, and what have you. So definitely some investment. Cybersecurity definitely has become, while CISOs obviously existed and pre-existed the pandemic, it's a much broader C-suite conversation. But I'll draw your attention to the next swath of priorities in terms of increased investment. Automation, smart analytics, cloud is in there as well for some of the nimbleness, and artificial intelligence. These are the elements that enterprises are looking towards to really, that are becoming those have-to-haves I refer to at the top of this chart. But what's interesting here, though, for as much and as high ranking as sort of broad automation and what we refer to as the AAA are rating in a survey like this, I always like to point out, and I always fear that I'm being Debbie Downer here, but it's very important for us to be cognizant of what the pre-pandemic baseline was for broad automation. And what this slide essentially shows, there's a good news story, I think, which is when you look at this and you look at all of these different types of technologies that we asked enterprises about their current state of adoption, we see that the unsure or no plans bars are very, very low. So you see very, very heavy adoption of these technologies. But to the headline, the digital workforce that wasn't, when you ask folks about how scaled up and industrialized their programs and usage of these same technologies are, it's quite scant. So it's, again, it's that good news, bad news story, but the pre-pandemic baseline is very squarely, there was lots of adoption, and we can probably also say lots of noise, but not the level of scale that we really, really needed. So there's definitely continues to be lots of work to be done. One more quick view on this. The other part of it is with enterprises using so many different technologies, we had also asked, well, hold on, how are you using them? Are you using them one at a time? Are you using them piecemeal in parallel? Have you found ways to integrate these technologies? But the big headline there, just as this slide says, is that there's still just a lot of that piecemeal or singular use. Just 11% of the sample from the same study, just 11% were finding ways to really leverage the integrated power of these tools. So our whole theme for today is looking at how to achieve post-pandemic success with automation and the role that the AAA trifecta, the three A's being automation, analytics, and AI, it is either nascent or not yet a reality for many enterprises. And so we'll just come to this slide briefly before I transition into some of the conversation with our great panelists here, is that back to the importance of a useful map and indicating where we are at any given time. We put together this slide a couple of years ago, and it's quite organic, and we keep updating it. And we affectionately call it the flashlight slide, but we're trying to reflect where enterprises are globally in their use of different types of automation technology. And so here, sort of the depiction of the couple of data slides I just showed you is here. We see that there's lots of use of piecemeal automation, and it's starting to push into our AAA trifecta. There's that Venn diagram, which is basically the HFS description for intelligent automation. We are squarely somewhere here where we want to get to, and this is very much continues to be the HFS vision for what successful automation programs look like and in their role in enabling digital transformation. It's that something that's actually familiar to all of us. It's that good old golden triangle of people, process, and technology, but we've added in a fourth component as well because we believe that data is so essential just in terms of how its strong role in informing and enabling all of the other elements. So this is what we're striving for. So that's a bit of a baseline and some market context. Let's roll over to start bringing in some of my fabulous panelists to tell us a bit about their experiences. So let's do a little bit of, we did some quick introductions, but let's spend a little bit more time getting to know each of the enterprises that are represented on the line today. We know that just as we're thinking about impacts of the pandemic and such, we know that it's not impacting all industries equally. What's interesting about Nextera and Insight is that you guys are both essentially in sectors that have been deemed essential, with lots of essential workers, with utilities and pharma. But Clemmy, why don't we go to you first? I'd love to have you just come back again and tell us a little bit about Nextera. We really want that context for what your company is all about. And then tell us again about your role and really how it ties to what your company is trying to achieve with automation.
Yes, thank you, Elena. So Nextera Energy is a utility company across the United States as well as Canada. We're headquartered actually in Juno Beach, Florida, so we get to see the ocean frequently, which is nice. But you know, really what our company is about is we're forward thinking in terms of how can we always do better, how can we provide clean energy. We are the world's largest in terms of wind and solar. We've recently stepped into trying to be on the innovation front. So our automation program does fall in our IT organization, but we have a strong partnership with the business as well. So like I said, my role is our enterprise automation COE lead. With that being said, I work with every different area of the organization. Our goal is to, you know, help them find automation opportunities. There's a lot of different ways that you can do that, but be able to showcase the opportunities and be able to scale them across the organization. And at the end of the day, one thing that's really important to us as a company is how do we dive back to the business value? What are we working on and how is it going to help us be more successful at the end of the day, depending on, the different things that we're working on. Like I said, our company is pretty large in the different areas, but tying back to that business value in a lot of different ways is really what our program stands behind.
Super, thank you for that background, Clemmy. Ryan, let's do the same for you. Tell us about, I'm gonna click to a slide about Insight. Tell us a little bit about Insight Pharma and same sort of elements, which is tell us a bit about your company and then your role and how that ties to your company's objectives for your automation program.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Lena. Insight's a biopharma company. We are based in Wilmington, Delaware, and we take pride in having our R&D right in Wilmington as well. So a lot of our discovery and research elements are done right in our labs there. And we really are a scientific company by nature. We really pride ourselves in that research that we do there in Wilmington, and we are, really starting to hit a groove with discovering some new medications and some compounds that we think could be breakthroughs, and we are currently involved with a lot of clinical trials, and probably a number that would even be more than a lot of large pharma companies, which is really kind of a testament to our research capability there at Insight. And we, like you mentioned, the pandemic for us was challenging because we had to make sure a lot of our clinical trials kept going. So that's a challenge for our whole industry, being that many of the patients that are on trials have to continue to get their medications. So, I think our whole industry was kind of turned upside down, if you will, with the pandemic. But I think so far we're, still keeping many of those moving forward. My specific role at Insight is around digital innovation. So I had the charge of being looking at expanding and creating that digital culture across Insight, and automation is a very major part of that journey for us, because we really want to have our businesses be comfortable with taking on more of the technologies. So I think it's really a fantastic area to be involved with. So I'm very excited to have joined Insight and to lead this charge.
Super, thank you for that, Ryan. Now let's bring these both, I'm going to put these side by side because I want to add a sort of a riff off this question. So we've got, all right, so an energy company. Clemmy, you articulated, a big part of what Nextera has been about in recent years, a gigantic focus on clean energy. And you had mentioned that one of your program objectives is really around just giving hours back to the business. And then Riad on your side, so you're a pharmaceutical company, but really just strongly rooted in science and above all, just helping to drive drug discovery and bring medicines to market that can really help patients. And you mentioned this idea that you're really on this journey to help. You use different words, but it sounded a lot like you're trying to better enable your scientists so they can do their core job. So in both cases, there's always this notion of, and I think in any automation program, you have to have that focus on what's the automation program objective, but ideally it should have some linkage to what your overall company mission is. So Clemmy, I'll start with you. When you think about that, creating that sort of bridge from what you're trying to do with automation and what you know about the culture and really the mission of your overarching company, what do you think that bridge is? How does that work out? Like what kind of angle do you take on that? How do you feel that you're supporting the automation program and supporting your company's mission?
Yeah, so I think what's awesome is one of our core values in Nextera's organization is we're committed to excellence. So that kind of culture allows us to be able to focus on doing automation the right way. So being able to look for opportunity, there's always the interest for it. So we've been very fortunate. We didn't have a lot of the pushback that most companies do initially with, the scare of automation. But being able to find opportunities, being able to lean, streamline, how do we do it the most effective way, the best way? How do we scale it? How do we see what we're doing and do it right? So a lot of companies are, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, but how do you set the foundation? One thing that we've been very fortunate on is being able to build that foundation out and being able to really build automations that are strong and that are going to consistently run in production. So I think just tying back to, obviously, business value is key, and the hours and savings are important, but making sure that you're doing reliable as well, and what you're producing is going to continue to add that value is one of the key things that I think our program ties back for.
Super, and that's a fabulous response, Connie, because we know that the bridge should exist, but it's always very interesting to us as a research house to see how the culture of the company really influences what that mission is. I mean, much like your core business, your energy, it needs to be reliable, so it influences how you build your programs as well. Thank you for that. Ryan, let's go over to you. I'd love to just briefly explore that sort of theme between the mission of the automation and creating that digital culture that you mentioned, and really what Insight stands for overall. What do you think about that bridge for you and for Insight?
Yeah, it's such a complex area to be involved with in terms of doing the research in the labs and the various trials that you have to do, and combinations and permutations of various compounds and testing and all of those areas, and then once you have a compound that you may be thinking could be something that could help patients, then to actually go through the clinical trial whole phased approach. It's a very long but very necessary process to do. Automation is something that we could apply that could help speed and make those long processes very efficient. So I think for us, it's around if we could potentially bring these new medications to patients quicker, that's really going to make a huge difference in their lives. So it's really kind of core to us to look at ways to help our scientists and colleagues to really help to accelerate those medications.
Got it. Thank you for that, Ryan. And just obviously back to the mission and some of the skills that sit at the heart of Insight, with just being really science driven for the drug discovery and such, it makes absolute perfect sense. I can assure you that just having been a sort of a student of automation, formerly as a practitioner and now as a researcher, the links are not always that clear, but I commend both of you and your organizations for enabling that clarity. So let's go a little bit deeper in terms of talking about some of the actual programs that you've established. Clemmy, I want to go to this on you. So you mentioned as part of your program, we're very adamant about learning, determining, figuring out, and above all, doing it right. And so you've been at this for a number of years. You were kind enough to share this timeline slide with us, but we'd really love to hear a little bit more about the specifics of your experience with automation. Sort of where have you been and what have you learned along the way? But so can you talk us through your journey a bit?
Of course. So I kind of laugh because we've had quite the journey. We decided to move forward with RPA in late 2016, and I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with 2016 and RPA. It was kind of this buzzword. People didn't really quite know about it. UiPath was, I think they had like maybe 20 employees at the time. So we jumped all in and we were like, hey, let's play with this. Let's see what we can do with it. But I think actually that was pretty awesome. We jumped in, we said, how do we find value? We didn't have a lot of research to go off of in terms of, you know, how do you build a governance program? What do you do with this? We had a couple of partners that we tried to work with in the early years in 2017. And honestly, it failed. We had a lot of rework, a lot of automations that didn't work. And we found that first year was our R&D year, and we needed to kind of take a step back and figure out, how do we level set, how do we build that strong governance, be able to scale automations across the enterprise. I think we were more focused on letting different areas of the company play and build out automations and see what they can find, but we weren't able to kind of enable that full-scale automation opportunity. So in 2018, we actually had Cognizant come in, and we just reset our program. We've seen phenomenal success. We rebuilt our model. We are able to now build automations quickly, but also scale them across different areas. Scale from you know, from an invoicing perspective, if we have a few to, you know, a couple hundred million, or sorry, a couple 100,000. You know, we're easily able to do that. And I don't think we had that foundation initially. But a couple of other things that we touched on were, after we built out that governance, we were able to kind of take a step back and say, what do we do next, right? So we said, hey, why don't we build out this role called champions? We had a great partnership with the business. We call them product owners at Nextera, business product owners. But underneath those product owners, how do we have people that are really in the grassroots that can help identify opportunities, that are living and breathing automation within their areas of the organization? And this role has been instrumental in helping to find the opportunities that are big enough that we should be working on to drive back to that, you know, business value and the excellence. And in 2019 and 2020, really what we've been focusing on is how do we continue to scale the automation that we have, but also tie back to, you know, showcasing what we've done, enabling our partners to be able to see, you know, the value of the automations that we've built out. So our analytics have been key around how are the bots performing, and what's the value that we're driving for your different areas of the organization. Our leadership has really enjoyed that. And then the artificial intelligence, you know, piece really was, how do we take the automations that we built and kind of get to the next level? So RPA and automation or the initial RPA was like that 80-20 rule. So being able to add like artificial intelligence into it has allowed us to really be able to do more end-to-end automation opportunities. So
super, thank you for that, Clemmy. That's quite a journey that you guys have been on. There's a bunch of stuff I could respond to on this, but I'll pick 2 points because I can't help myself. One, I just want to quickly mention the champions point. One of the things that we've observed and we've seen in our research, we see it quantitatively and qualitatively, is that automation programs tend to be more successful when you bring your, wait for it, Clemmy, you bring your humans on the journey with you. So automation is being done with people rather than done to people. And so I think the Champions program is a great way to help make that point and reinforce that point. And then, of course, I have to comment on the combo of automation analytics and artificial intelligence. Literally, that is the 3 A's, the AAA trifecta. So it's very interesting to be able to see that in play here. And to your point that it was, you had to go on an incremental journey as well. You needed to get the baseline right with RPA. You had to get the program set well. You layered in the analytics, and now it's the next wave of taking it to the next level. We very often see that sort of incremental growth in terms of your trajectory, but it's interesting to hear how it is starting to contribute to greater value and benefit. Marisa, I want to bring you into the conversation. So you're with Cognizant now, clearly. But before you joined Cognizant, I know you were a practitioner yourself. You were a program owner at GE. But I'd love you to add some of your comments from all of your experience, both GE, now Cognizant, and Nextera, about how this experience has informed some of your perspective on this value of the AAA trifecta approach. I'd love any perspectives based on your experience with Nextera or your personal experience or any of your other clients. What's really to be gained from this integrated approach?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I would say as I shifted from being the customer over to the service provider, one of the things that was really important was looking for the place where I could be that service provider I had been looking for also when I was the practitioner and I was running my program. And what is really important is that as we go and we work and look at these journeys, if you talk to Clemmy and Nextera or Riot at Insight, it's always about flexing to meet the client where they're at. And it's really important to understand where you at in the journey. How can we work more like Nextera Energy or whatever client that we're working with? And it's also really important to come in and recognize that all this technology, while it's great and has become more intuitive, it still doesn't just work the second you put it in. It takes time, it takes effort, to your point, to bring people along the journey. That was one of the big things that I learned myself going through this on the other side was you had to spend the time answering the questions, demystifying this technology, explaining it, how to get the benefits, and then demonstrating it back was really integral if we wanted to be successful and get the outcomes. Because you had to bring along the business folks whose processes we were automating. And in terms of the integrated approach with this AAA trifecta, it resonates so much because when you put it together, the initial automation, you get benefits. You do see some of that, but you need typically to help with getting the data in. It's really important. There's a lot of data quality issues out there. It's how do you understand, put reasoning behind it with the AI, the ML, the other technology, and then having that objective conversation around, what value am I driving back? Where do we want to target? Because I could see the insights in the data on where we could go next to get more improvement. It's really important to be able to get that end-to-end automation, which gets you the bigger outcomes as well. And that's what everyone's driving for is how do I drive back that value to my organization, not just in savings, by the way, but across the board in customer, employee experience, revenue dollars. And you can do all of that when you integrate these together into the AAA trifecta.
Gotcha. Thank you for that, Marisa. And that really starts to get to that point. It's really one of our core questions that we wanted to try and address for this session, which is, what is that added value? What do you get when you try and combine these? We'll come back to that theme in a moment, but really appreciate that perspective, Marisa. So Ryan, let's toggle back over to you because you made an interesting comment in your some of the thoughts you shared with us earlier. You introduced this idea of building your objective is to build a digital culture within Insight. So I put together just a brief slide here, just because as I've been getting to know you and getting to know what Insight's all about. So at the top of the screen here, in the bits that I've circled in red, it's that company mission that you were talking about before, which is rigorous science being at the core of everything you do to discover, develop, and commercialize medicines to improve the lives of patients. It's a very, very clear mission. And then further, like obviously back to our reality, knee-deep in global pandemic, just continued consistency in that focus. Your priority is to ensure patients maintain access to medicine. And by the way, I think for the benefit of our audience, it was interesting as we were having discussions leading up to this session, you were talking about how the concept of allowing folks, essential workers, to continue working, that's something that was the idea of suiting up in PPE was something that's really standard fare in your sector. Scientists you're working in labs quite individually in many cases. Obviously, the collaboration has lots of hooks into it, but I just found that to be a very, very powerful business about how some of the work continued to try and achieve these objectives. But one of the things that I thought was interesting in some of our discussions is that just back to that point about what does building a digital culture and creating an effective automation program look like for a pharmaceutical company. And you had this great quote, but I'll point to the very last sentence of it, which is, it's your view of how you really give benefit back to these scientists. And I thought this perspective of science is not moving data around. In that quest to really try and enable access to medicines and improving lives of patients. Yeah, it really brings it to a pretty substantial head there, that it's not about moving data around. So I'd love for you to talk just a little bit more about how the automation program and this creation of the digital culture that you're building, Ryad, how are you really doing that? How are you making this real? How are you making it palatable for the scientists that you work with? Share some insights with us, please.
Yeah, I think it's I'm in awe of our scientists. When I see what they do in our labs and their dedication. So any way that we could help from a digital perspective is something that would be really great for the company. I'll start first by saying our automation model is not around headcount. It's not about trying to reduce the number of folks. As a matter of fact, it's almost the opposite. We want to give back to our scientists time so they can further continue their quest on discovering potential breakthroughs for our patients. So it's really something that is extremely important to be able to help them get rid of some of the work that is really moving data around. So I think it's very, very important that we give that time back to them. And that's something that they very, very desperately want to do, is to, have the time so they can do what they really should be doing, right? So I think that's an extremely good point. And as we kind of do more and more automations and building more digital bots, I think what's happening is that the business is getting very, very comfortable with taking on more of this technology. So it goes very kind of in jive with what the digital culture that I have been thinking through, in that we want to increase that comfort level, the confidence in doing more and more digital, and then ultimately you will get towards building that digital culture, because it all is about change. And if you can make the business be very comfortable with the change and even want to change, I think automation is really helping us to solve that additional technology increase and helping to build that digital culture. So it's really something that is almost a win-win for everyone, right? Because it's a win for having to expedite or build a digital culture. It's a win for our scientists and colleagues that are saving and getting much more time. And then it's ultimately a win for the patients, because if we do get these medications to market faster, those medications could help them have better outcomes.
We definitely love a win-win-win across the board there, Ryad. Hey, clarifying question for you. So I mentioned in response to that Champions program that Clemmy told us about, I made the point that it's always really great when you're sort of taking your humans on the journey with you, sort of doing with rather than doing to. How is that in the context of the scientists? Are there any examples that you can share with us about, without giving away any trade secrets, of course, that really showcase how there is that willingness and openness to engage from the automation standpoint?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think that's something that Cognizant, helped us to develop, that thinking around having a champion within the business to really spearhead some of the thinking, and helping to build that spirit across the organization. And specifically for our journey, which isn't as long so far. We just started our pilot program in October of 2019, so we're getting towards a year into it. But we've had so much success, I think, really in result of having a very, very strong champion who is a scientist. And in reality, she was the one who really felt that she needed to have the time back to her, and she was the one who really created and thought of doing this type of automation. And without her, I think we would not have been too far along on this journey.
Indeed, really, the power of the champions is very, very pervasive. And just from the, I'm not a scientist, and nor do I play one on TV, but just that concept, that very powerful element of your quote there, Riad, science is not about moving data around. You definitely found some key influencers within your organization who squarely said, we know there's a better way, which I think brings us pretty squarely to outcomes. Let's talk a little bit about some of these outcomes of programs. So Riad, your program at Insight, as you just mentioned, you're earlier in your journey. So you're ramping up, you're starting to realize some of your benefits. Clemmy, you took us through that, the timeline of sorts and progression that you took us through. It's very clear you've been on this journey a bit longer. So I think that you're just perfect to talk with us about some of your outcomes that you've actually seen in this space. So maybe if you could take a couple of minutes, and why don't you talk us through what you've achieved? And I think what would be really useful to our audience is help us understand a little bit about how would this have looked different if you didn't take the AAA trifecta approach and really bring your humans along with you like you've done? What would be different here? What do you think?
Great. So I think the key thing that I just want to start with is you have to have a strong governance model, and that laid the foundation for us to be able to have the rest of it. But I definitely think the trifecta has been important. Our champions have been instrumental. So, we did build out this program, our automation champions. They are helping us to drive these opportunities, but a lot of the reason that they're able to drive those opportunities is we're giving them tools like reporting and analytics to be able to see like what other ideas are out there from other areas of the organization. How do we build a community of practice across our champions to be able to do knowledge sharing and share ideas that they may think are similar or, expanding upon it. So we've seen, I think we have 300 plus ideas in our backlog right now, which seems a little crazy because we're building 10 to 12 automations a month. How do we think we're ever going to get there? But the key is we're constantly looking at them. The champions are helping us to review them and, making sure that we're able to progress forward with that. And we're able to, reduce the cycle time was key, but I think a lot of that goes back to our governance model, being able to, operational health has been key, showing, how the bots are performing, and then helping us think, how do we replicate this? How do we get our cycle time down and continuing to do things better? And we have a lot of reusable code that we've built that has really helped us. We call them microbots. My team voted, and that was the name they came up with, but microbots that allow us to plug and play and easily scale ideas across the automation as well. And I think the key thing that I can say is we're consistently seeing now, this is the third year in a row, that we're having a full return on our investment. So we're in July, and so far this year, we've already had a full return. We're on track to maybe not have a $10 million annual benefit, because I do think that the pandemic may not have had a significant impact to us, but we may not have as strong of a year, but we're still going to have a phenomenal year to what we're delivering, because we've built this program that has the ability to do end-to-end automation, as well as showcase what we're doing and continue to have that funnel of ideas and the business buy-in and everything to keep us flowing.
Gotcha. Congratulations, Clemmy. It seems like a very robust program. And I think part of the key there, and this is the notion of that's really, really critical, is that this is not intended to be a flash in the pan. This is meant to be systemic return on your investment. So hearing that you're able to consistently achieve while growing I think it just bodes very, very well for continued future success. Marisa, I'd like to bring you back in then. You had mentioned in your response to one of the earlier questions, just talking about how your experience has been both with Nextera and with other clients, and then back in your own practitioner days as well, that you continue to live and breathe and see these types of results because of this type of the so-called AAA trifecta and integrated automation approach. Just wondering if you've got any other insights to add about, I know I couched the question here as what would have happened if you didn't do this, but just wondering what other insights and learnings that you have that you could add here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that really stands out is that when you talk about all these different tools and technologies individually, you can get benefits, you can drive value. But the difference when you start to integrate them, you really think about how do I apply this AAA trifecta? How do I bring my people along? How do I think about the process? How do I, take the quality of data back? That whole integrated approach you're talking about, and what we're hearing here today, you start to see a different type of conversation on benefits. Instead of just maybe breaking even, you're talking about multi-fold returns. You're talking about exponential benefits back to the organization in hours, effort, savings. I mean, the other piece that we've seen is with COVID happening, just a shift also in the conversation on how do we respond faster to customers? How do we handle a large influx of volume like that so their experience doesn't change, actually improves because we're helping them? How do we, think about resiliency within a business operation? And when you're integrating this way, it allows you to have that ramp up, ramp down ability. It allows you to have, even if you have to shift the way you're working for a while, you can actually use digital to be able to help drive the business operations. And you see that shift in conversation that's really important. And I think here is, if you weren't integrating, you still would see good, and you would still see things that, everyone's happy about. But there's a difference when you're integrating this together, because you get great. You get exceptional, and you get to have accelerated benefits that people are really excited about, and they want to be a part of because they see the benefit back to the organization.
Yeah, I think really great point, Marisa. Back to that, what I showed on our so-called flashlight slide earlier, that sort of took you from piecemeal to the AAA trifecta to that people, process, technology plus data. That's what really helps you get to that exponential combos of the technology. To your point, really, really important. But you get to that exponential benefit, something that compounds and is able to grow, like what you were talking about, Clemmy, year on year by bringing all of those elements together. All right, folks, I'm keeping an eye on time here. And so I'm going to skip over this one slide because I really want to make sure that we talk about this. One thing that we've been doing a lot of at HFS, really across all of our different coverage areas, is really trying to have a firm grasp on what the impact of the pandemic has been. So we call this the automation edition. And by no means do we think that this is everything that's changed as it pertains to automation, but we've just bubbled some things up. And so we think that there's been think of this as the pre-pandemic baseline on the left, and sort of what the new reality is on the right. So we've seen massive changes to technology, sort of that piecemeal view or piecemeal and parallel view that I mentioned earlier. Now we're really seeing many of the problems that need to be solved during the pandemic. Just that whole, hey, gosh, we have many more manual or very physical processes that are not working during the pandemic. And many of the solutions actually required a AAA approach and integrated automation approach to really address them. So we've got one big bucket of technology change, second big bucket of use cases. I think pre-pandemic, we saw a lot of AAA trifecta technologies and broad automation programs being largely applied to and led by operations. We say finance and accounting continues to be the ultimate poster child, but we do see expansion across other functions as well, but definitely with a strong back office theme. But one of the things we really observed during the pandemic is we've got this concept of automation heroes of the pandemic, but just really a lot of different use cases that came about, various needs that came about during the pandemic, sort of solving some of those manual and physical problems that really expanded the use beyond operations to do a lot of things that are customer facing, like whether it be for the US grappling with the PPP loans, travel reimbursements for just the whole travel, like the airline sector, that just everyone's plans were scuttled essentially. So we've seen a real broadening of use cases. Point three, I think, is around the speed. I think a lot of the speed of automation development and deployment was very often measured in months, as long as requirements are all buttoned up. And we sort of think of it almost as it was sort of described as agile in approach, but in practicality was maybe much more really waterfall in delivery. But just some of the urgency of this pandemic, it's really maybe not entirely made agile be realized, but I think that there's a big piece of being more satisfied with good enough solutions because at least you have something to work with. So a really big focus on increased speed. Fourthly, outcomes. Clemmie and Marisa, you had some really good insights here. And Brad, you were talking about some great realization you're having already and continued aspirations. But a lot of what we saw pre-pandemic were the value investing often tied to cost savings. And I think in the last probably 12 months or so, you're seeing more of the employee benefit starting to come out. But in the same way that the use cases are expanding and the tool sets to enable them, you see just a greater application of what automation is being used for to create better bridges with what your company's all about and what your business core mission is, and really impacting very square focus on employee experience, but much more on customer experience as well. As well as I think what underpins all of it is just that greater focus on what we tend to call everyone's new favorite word, really making sure that you're building systems and programs that are very resilient, sort of like Clemmie, you were saying before, building things right. That's just something that's become very, very important. And then last but not least, it's the people. We sort of say pre-pandemic, if you were not directly involved in an automation program, you either were completely unaware of its potential or maybe it's a duly anxious there. I think what I actually mean is unduly anxious, worried that this was somehow going to impact your job or at least certainly drive change. But as one enterprise I spoke with recently, they said the pandemic has been bizarrely the best internal marketing ever for automation because it's reached some of these heroes of the pandemic have really just opened many folks' eyes, even in the C-suite, to the benefits and value of automation. So these are some of our observations. Again, I don't purport to say that this is everything, but it's a representation. What I'd love to do real quick is let's do an around the table. I'd like you guys to each respond about which one of these do you think is the most impactful and why? Ryan, why don't we start with you?
I would say number two. I think we've actually found some COVID-19 use cases that helped us and are still helping us now. Probably quickly followed with number three.
Super. All right, we got a number two. Marisa, let's pop over to you. What have you seen from the broad swath of clients that you work with?
Yeah, a big one has been outcomes for us and being able to really show the benefit back, helping get those volumes in. And then I would say too, a big one has been people as well. We're getting a lot of questions on, how do we enable people? They want to be a part of the solution. They need help. And so they see automation and AI as a way that they can get that help and be a part of making the necessary changes.
Okay, super helpful. And then Clemmie, last but not least, what's your experience? What do you think?
So I would actually say similar to Marisa. So people has been one area that we're seeing a big uptick in, and it's more around how can individuals in the organization help more. So, taking that champion to maybe the next level and allowing them to do some type of development or something like that. And then also use cases. We've seen a couple of really significant use cases come out of this, not just COVID related, but having to work remotely. People are doing things in a different way, more digital, and they're coming up with these phenomenal use cases that, I think we're seeing a big difference. So.
More digital. I think those are two of my favorite words right now, Clemmie. All right, folks, just keeping an eye on time. We're right at time here, so let's do a 1-minute lightning round here. We're going to stay on this same slide, and what I'd love for you guys to each quickly say is, all right, we've just identified what some of the big changes are, and you've just mentioned the ones that you've seen the most. I'd like each of you to say, and this is sort of our leave behind of sorts for our audience, what's the most important thing that can be done? What's necessary to make these changes stick on a go-forward basis to help expand automation programs and continue to help enterprises embrace the AAA and integrated automation? Clemmie, why don't we go back to you?
Okay, so I think the biggest thing to stick would be having, I kind of mentioned that day 2 governance model. So a model that is not just, how do you build a program, but how do you have a program that is going to continue to thrive no matter what gets thrown at it. But also in addition to that is having really strong executive leadership support. Those are a couple of key things that we saw, making sure that we're, focused on our goals and objectives by having that support, we're seeing the full effect.
Superb. Thank you for that, Clemmy. Ryan, let's go over to you. What do you think? What needs to be done to make these changes stick?
Yeah, I think having a business that business champions and business users that really want to take on that change of doing more automation. I think that is one area that is very, very important. And then I would agree with Clemmy around the executive leadership, where having that environment that the leaders will actually want to have their teams participate in this type of ideation and then ultimately a construction of bots.
Absolutely. Very, very, it makes a world of sense. All right, Marisa, last but not least, what do you think? What's necessary to make this stick, make these changes stick and push automation forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Ryan and Clemmy, you were spot on it. The only thing I would echo there is, this is all driving change. And while change is sometimes something that people feel nervous about or resist a bit, when you bring people along the journey and they get to be a part of the solutions, you really are able to move that needle and get the adoption that helps get this sticky within an organization. So my recommendation also is continue to have the people raising their hands, encouraging the challenge of the solutions, challenge how do we do more, how do we get more out of this, how do I drive more outcomes and value back, and create that connection within your organization to bring business, IT, and these teams together to drive even more effective outcomes for your customers.
That's super. So we are at time now. I will point out that what I continue to find just wildly fascinating about the broad automation space and the AAA trifecta space is that while ultimately we're talking about enabling technologies, so much of the conversation, and even just in the responses that you all put forth, we're all about creating a strong program, bringing your humans on the journey to optimize benefit, and assuming strong executive leadership, and making sure that you're always keeping that strong eye on people, process, and technology. So obviously the tech is important and it's enabling, but there's so many other facets that come into it. So we're out of time today, folks. For any of those that submitted questions that we didn't get to, we'll make sure that we follow up with you. But we really thank everyone for our audience for spending their time with us today. And I'd just like to give a gigantic thank you to Clemmy, Ryad, and Marisa for sharing their insights and experience with us today. Thank you so much, everyone. And this officially concludes our webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.